Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John with Murder by the Book coming to you with another virtual event. We're so excited for tonight's event. But before I bring everybody out, we're going to give everybody a few seconds to find us, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. So as I said, this is John with Murder by the Book. I am the event coordinator at the bookstore, coming to you live from my living room this evening. Tonight, we're going to be chatting with Jane Harper and Greer Hendricks. But before I bring them out, I wanted to mention just a couple of things that we have going on at the store. So we did over 130 author events with over 200 authors in 2020 virtually. So there's lots of stuff available on our YouTube channel. If you haven't checked it out, you can do that and see what we've got coming up. We've got great stuff coming up this week. We're excited on Friday night. We're going to have John Hart talking about his newest book, and AJ Finn is going to be interviewing him. So we're super excited about that. Next week, we're going to be chatting with MJ Rose and Fiona Davis on Wednesday. We've got a bunch of cozy stuff coming up next week, too. So lots of really great things. So if you have not checked out any of the virtual events, definitely keep checking back with us. The store is open again for browsing. So if you are in the Houston area, please come visit us. We're limiting it to 6 people in the store, which generally isn't an issue. So if you pull up and the parking lot's full, maybe just poke your head in and see kind of where we're at capacity-wise, and we'll let you in. Of course, we're also always available at murderbooks.com, and we're also doing curbside pickup too. So tonight, our part-time bookseller and podcaster, book lover, Cindy is going to be hosting the chat with Greer and Jane. So I'm going to bring Cindy in. How are you tonight, Cindy?
I'm good. How are you, John?
I'm good. I miss our Friday mornings. It's so good to actually get to see you this way.
I know.
So for those of you who are not local to the store and have not seen Cindy, Cindy Burnett is an avid reader and book reviewer. She loves to talk about books everywhere she can. She is the host of the Thoughts from a Page podcast, where she interviews authors about their latest works. She actively promotes books she loves on social media, including Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. She writes book columns for the Buzz magazines, Buzz Reads, and Page Turners, reviews books for Book Reporter, writes roundups for She Reads, and is a co-creator of Conversations from a Page, which is a Houston-based literary salon and online book club. And I will be dropping links to both the podcast and the literary salon in the comments in just a bit. So if you guys are not familiar with that and you want to check that out, you'll be able to do that as well. And tonight we are joined also by Jane Harper, whose newest book, The Survivors, has just come out. How are you this evening, Jane?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everyone.
It's so good to have you back. Have you just been to the store just the one time?
I think I've been twice, actually. I've been
lucky enough. Twice. That's right. It was twice. So as everybody knows who's been in the store, we're all huge fans of Jane's books. She is the New York Times bestselling author of the #1 international bestseller, The Dry, Force of Nature, and The Lost Man. The Survivors is her 4th novel. Jane previously worked as a print journalist in Australia and in the UK, and lives in Melbourne with her husband, daughter, and son. And rounding us out this evening, we have Greer Hendricks here with us. How are you tonight, Greer?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
So Greer Hendricks is the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, The Wife Between Us. Prior to becoming a novelist, she spent 2 decades as an editor at Simon Schuster. She obtained her master's degree in journalism from Columbia University, and her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Allure, and Publishers Weekly. She lives in Manhattan with her husband and 2 children. And so we were talking about this before we went live. Greer and her co-writer, Sarah, had the unique experience of actually getting to come to Murder by the Book in the middle of March last year. So literally it was COVID timeline wise. It was, I think, the day before they officially canceled the Houston rodeo, and publishers were already starting to cancel stuff, and some authors were out on the road. Nobody was really sure what was going on. So I think it was literally, we had the event with them, then our event with Peter Swanson, then Deanna Rayburn, and then 2 days later, like, the city was shut down. So she had the interesting experience of getting to travel while all of this was going on. And I remember showing up at the store and we were all just like, we have no idea what's happening.
No, yeah. Every day I kept calling my doctor and saying, should I be on the road? Should I be on the road? Fine, it's fine. And then literally it was like, no, go home now.
Yeah, I think at that point we were like Clorox wiping the chairs every day. And before the event, we would make announcements like, okay, you can't come behind the table and hug the authors. If you want photos, you have to do a selfie from way in front of the table. And then, yeah, like 3 days later, it was like, yep, no more author events. So couple more things before I disappear and let everybody get to chatting. If you guys are watching on Facebook or YouTube, if you have questions for anybody, you can drop those in the comments. I will be monitoring for those, and we'll leave some time at the end for crowd Q&A. Wanted to mention that Sarah's and Greer's book, You Are Not Alone, has just come out in paperback. Jane's book, The Survivors, we have signed book plates to go with those as well. If you miss any part of the talk, Facebook and YouTube will archive it, and you'll be able to catch that later. So I'm going to pop away and turn it over to Cindy, and I will see you guys in just a little bit.
Thanks, John. Hello. So how are y'all both this evening? Today for you, Jane, I keep forgetting.
That's right, yeah. Midday.
Yes, exactly. I keep thinking it's nighttime for you, but it's actually tomorrow. So, well, I'm looking forward to talking with both of you about your books. So why don't we start out with Jane, tell me a little bit about The Survivors, and then Greer can tell us a little bit about You Are Not Alone.
Yeah, sure. So my book, The Survivors, is another Australian mystery, which is what I write. This time it's set on the rugged coastline of Tasmania, which is a really small island state over here. And it's set in a kind of tiny coastal community. So there's a lot of small town intrigue and secrets to be uncovered. And it follows the main character, who's a young father called Kieran Elliott. And he has returned to this hometown, kind of burdened by, some actions of the past that are still weighing on him in quite a significant way. But he comes back to help his aging parents. And he's barely arrived when a body is discovered on the beach, sort of throwing this whole community into turmoil. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to write this book. And I really enjoyed the way the mystery came together. So so that's The Survivors.
Well, and it's wonderful. I can say that. I have read it and loved it. So I'm always happy when you have a new book coming out. So Greer, why don't you tell us a little bit about You Are Not Alone?
Sure. First of all, I just also wanted to say, Jane, I devoured your book. I read it in literally 2 sittings. So loved it. So congratulations.
Thank you. Same. Thank you.
So You Are Not Alone is the protagonist is a young woman named Shay Miller, and it's set in New York City. And Shay sees the world through data. Her whole existence is sort of like analyzing things through kind of numbers and very factually. She's living with a male roommate who she's secretly in love with, but he has a new girlfriend. And she's recently lost her job. She heads off on an early Sunday morning to go to the library and enters the subway station. And it's pretty empty, as it can be on Sunday mornings. This was all pre-pandemic. And she sees a woman standing at the far end of the platform. And they're the only 2 people she thinks on the platform, and the woman leaps to her death in front of the subway. And Shay becomes obsessed with this woman. What would lead this, young woman to do something like this? And she becomes involved with this woman's kind of whole circle of friends, trying to better understand what would compel someone to do this. And then if Sarah was here, my writing partner, we would say, bum, bum, bum.
Well, I was just going to say, you write with Sarah. So what's that like, writing with somebody?
So I've never written by myself, so I really have nothing to compare it to. But as you said in your introduction, I was a book editor for 20 years, and I was a very hands-on editor. I was very collaborative with my authors. And when I left corporate publishing, in the back of my mind, I knew that I wanted to write, but I really wasn't telling a lot of people. Sarah and I had gotten very close during our time. I edited 7 or 8 of her solo books, and so when I left corporate publishing, I confessed this secret to her that I wanted to write, and she suggested that we write together. And I was like, why does she want to write with me? She's written 8 books by herself. So what's great for me, again, not having done it by myself, is that there's an accountability. Like every day we get online and we write through Google Docs and Google Hangouts. And so there's a discipline that I don't know if I would have by myself. I can't wait to hear about your routine, Jane, but we get on and we write every single line together. We'll go in separately and edit in suggested mode, But basically, we're talking through each scene, and then we're writing it. And we're constantly texting, emailing, brainstorming together, morning, noon, night. I'll probably send her something after this about an idea that I had for the end of our book.
I was curious about that because it's always interesting to hear when people write together their process. And just like individual authors all write differently, every pair is different too. So it's fun to hear that.
Yeah.
So Jane, what about you? What's your writing process like?
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear, how you guys do it. Because I think one of the things actually that, although I would say mine is actually quite different, but the real similarity there is like accountability, because I think that is maybe the most important thing actually. So I used to be a print journalist, and I was a journalist for 13 years before I wrote my first book, and that has. Of all the things that kind of taught me, which was so many things, but one of the key things was, I guess working to deadlines and making sure you get kind of the words on the page in a sort of timely fashion. And so that's one of the key things that, I don't, I unfortunately maybe actually have someone kind of logging in to check I'm sort of on the computer, but I do actually make sure I try and have that accountability as well. So I will set myself like really, like a lot of kind of rolling deadlines, like over almost like the course of the year, I will kind of know where I need to be in a year's time. And then, so that means in 6 months time, I need to be here, which means in 3 months time here, which means, within the next sort of few weeks, I need to be starting this part of the process. And I'll kind of know at each stage roughly where I need to be hitting in order to make the overall deadline. But I just kind of, I'm sort of completely the opposite, I guess. And for me, it's a very sort of solo existence, I have to say. And so I have these deadlines for myself, and then I will, go to this office all on my own and sit there and kind of try and do what I need to do over the course of that day or week. And then I'll kind of do the whole thing on my own. I don't really have any other readers or anybody who sees it until I've done really like the full sort of drafts, a couple of drafts really. And it's kind of at a place where I feel like that's all I can do with it, and I need some professional input. But the only person who ever really hears about it is my poor husband, who I kind of pepper with ideas and kind of need to sometimes say things out loud. And the poor man has to sit there with like no context often. And, it sounds great, So, but yeah, it'll be really, it's fascinating to hear that, how collaboratively you two work. Like it's kind of line by line. That's really interesting.
What's great is that I'm sure when you're alone, you're probably thinking, should I do this? Should I do that? And you're going back and forth. And with us, we do that too. But at a certain point, you just sort of like make a decision. Someone feels like, what, let's go in this direction. And you're like, okay, let's go in that, let's go in that direction. So it can take, I feel like if I was by myself, I literally would, be questioning every single choice that I was making.
Yeah, I completely understand that, because I think sometimes actually that's why, my husband, it becomes a sort of sounding board, whether he, can really knows what's going on or not, because I think sometimes you just need to kind of even say it out loud, like test it. You're not even really testing for the reaction. It's almost just kind of putting it out there and seeing, and that sometimes almost can kind of, make you lean one way or the other. So I can fully believe actually having that conversation would maybe make the path a little bit clearer.
That's so interesting, because Sarah and I, we walk and talk a lot. Like if we're stuck, we'll just put on our sneakers, and we live in separate cities. So, we're on the phone, but we'll be, out walking our dogs, and we'll just talk and talk endlessly. And we'll repeat, like I might say a whole line of a plot, and she'll just repeat it all back to me. And I'll be like, I just said that. And we're like, yes, I know, because we just have to keep saying, especially when you write books like yours, and ours that are so twisty and turny. It's sometimes you can't even keep track of, right, like, where the plot's going, even in your own book. Do you ever find that?
I find as well, like walking is like, isn't that like the best thing? Like the number of times, I can't even tell you where I've just sat there all day thinking like, I really don't know quite how to sort of fix this or solve this. And I'll think, okay, I'm leaving it. And I walk out and I'll lock the office, and I'll be like walking, I'll be like 10 paces from the door, and it'll come to me, and I'll be like getting at my phone, like quickly writing it down before I forget. But it's so interesting. That's actually a really good tip, I think, that is kind of a bit underestimated, that actually just, changing your environment can actually really shake things loose. It's just hard to remember that myself sometimes when I'm sitting there staring at the screen, you know?
Yeah, but I do think it does shake it loose. And Sarah and I also, because we're together, we have to ask each other kind of like almost like permission to, get up and do anything. So we'll say to each other, T&P, like, can we go make some tea and go to the bathroom? And then sometimes that just, just walking away even, to the kitchen, you just like, oh, okay, wait, I'm out of this. I get it,
Yeah.
Well, what about the whole process? Like that's when you're sitting down and you're writing and you're stuck. But what about when you start out? So Jane, you're starting with the survivors, and are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Do you say, okay, I have this little idea, tiny idea, it's set in Tasmania, here I go? Or do you lay the whole thing out and then start writing? And then Greer, you can tell us what you all do next.
I'm a big planner, and I know I completely understand it doesn't work for everybody, but for me, this is the kind of way that works best. And I actually, so when I'm thinking about the idea, first of all, I'm not even really thinking about like an opening or a character. I'm actually thinking about that end point where it's like that resolution where you have, two characters or a few characters come together in that sort of moment that you reach in a book where you're like, oh, okay, so that's what happened. There's this extreme, I guess, moment of like emotion or events that have kind of led to this point. And that when I'm thinking of a book, it's almost, that's kind of what I'm thinking about for like the idea. And then it's a question of working backwards a little bit, like who are these people and what's led them to this moment? Is it spontaneous? Is it some like long held, grudge? Is it an accident? What's kind of brought them here? And then, so what characters do I need to sort of tell that? And then where would be a good sort of setting to support that story? And then, okay, and then what's the best, if I think about that journey that's taken them to this point, what's the most kind of grabby, interesting bits to start the book in, like to really pull those readers in? And then that becomes like the start point to kind of lead them through to this end point. And I'll like plot out the whole thing. So I will know at least roughly like beginning, middle, end. And then I'll kind of start noting that down. And then I'll just really expand on it from there, start weaving in. So firstly, I think about the idea, and then it's big picture stuff. So don't worry about any kind of little details like character names or hair color or title of the book or anything like that. It's all big picture, sort of bones of the plot. And then gradually, as the process goes on, I'm starting to get into the more kind of minutiae, like finessing it as I go on. So that's my process.
That is so fascinating. So can I just ask a question? So you knew the end of the survivors before you started writing it?
Yeah, I knew the ends. I knew the end before I knew where I was going to start the book. Like I actually changed the start of the book a few times, but I never changed the ends. Yeah, and I knew the cat. So everything in the book is built around the ending, and the reason I do that is because I find then. My biggest fear is like painting myself into a corner where, this whole 70,000 words and I just need to bring it all together. I'm like, oh God, I can't, like, this seems unsolvable because it is. So that's what I try and avoid. So I try, like, I kind of start with the end. So I know that's what's going to happen. And then and I genuinely find you can honestly weave in so many like cool, like red herrings and stuff. When you know the core line, it's so much easier for me, I find, to kind of then turn people's heads, because you can kind of think, well, what's the reader? Yeah, readers are pretty smart. They're very sophisticated. What are they going to be guessing at this point? You can be like, okay, so I'll give you a little clue that's going to make you really think that then, and so that's kind of how I do it anyway.
Oh God. Okay. I wish I could say that each of our books, I can't even say that we have one way for all across each book, because each one has been entirely different. So for The Wife Between Us, it was like there's a big twist at the end of part one, no spoilers, but that was the lightning bolt idea for that entire book, was this very, I think, clever twist that we came up with. And we built a whole book around that. And then An Anonymous Girl was more, I won't get into, like, I'm not going to list through each one, but they were all different. And in the book that we're currently working on, I'm just going to call it book 4 because I'm not allowed to say the title, although we started the whole book based on a title that our editor gave us. She's like, what do you think about this as a title? And it just propelled us into, like, just started getting our wheels spinning. And it does deal with a complicated marriage and therapy, which is like our 2 favorite topics, are like, screwed up marriages and therapy. And we did feel like we do feel like we know the ending of this one. We're at 90,000 words, so I've got like 10,000 more, but we are still struggling with those last 4 or 5 scenes to figure out like how to get from here to there. And that sounds like something you would not be in the pickle we're in right now.
I did find, I mean, that's exactly actually why I planned, because exactly that, like, I sort of sometimes, you think, oh my God, how can I get from, it's not even A to B, it's like, like W to Z, so, but I mean, and actually, like, I know, like, a lot of authors, like, they feel like planning doesn't let them be creative, but I find, again, like, personally the opposite, because when I kind of plan, I'm just sort of throwing in, sort of skeleton ideas. You can try out 10 different things without having to, like, I hate deleting words. Like, I hate writing stuff that doesn't work. So I tend to kind of plan to the point where I'm pretty sure this is like how it needs to be. And then finally I like commit to, like, okay, I'm going to write this scene. But it has to, like, earn its place,
That's interesting. So have you ever, so for You Are Not Alone, Sarah and I started the book. It was set in a very like a very claustrophobic environment. It had the kind of the data girl protagonist, Shay, but it was set almost in this like weird retreat-like atmosphere. And we wrote 200 pages and realized it was so claustrophobic, we didn't know where to go. Like, every day we were saying to ourselves, what's the next exciting scene? And we just couldn't, we couldn't come up with it. It wasn't just like writer's block, there was no amount of walking that was going to solve the problem. And we had to throw out 200 pages and start all over. And that was, I mean, it was scary. I've got to say, that was scary. And then the book, once we set it in New York and opened it up, the book just like flew out of us, and it just worked, but it just didn't work. You would not have gotten into that mess.
You know what? I know exactly what you mean. That kind of, and I think, like, hats off to you for kind of making that decision, because I know how hard that is. So hard, because that has happened to me, even despite, like actually regularly it happens, to be honest, because even despite the planning, sometimes things look great in a plan, and then when you actually put them on the paper, weirdly they, as like thoroughly as I might have worked it out, it just doesn't quite work. Like, there's something about it. It's just maybe not quite the right thing. And I feel like now I try really hard to listen to that feeling where you just feel like you're kind of pushing things uphill, and you're sort of trying to force situations and character interactions. And it's taken me like kind of 4 books to kind of get to that point. But now I try and listen to that straight away, because I find if you're pushing it uphill, for me, it's usually a sign that there's something fundamentally a bit wrong with it. It's not just that the words aren't flowing. It's actually that, like, it's kind of going against the grain. Whereas then you write, like, you change the setting, or you do something, it changes the whole thing, and then suddenly everything else kind of makes more sense. And I've totally had that. I actually have that almost, usually what I plan, I do a full first draft, and then that then unlocks better ideas, and I have to go back and do the whole thing again anyway. And it's like, it's hard to do. It's really hard to do, but I don't know. I mean, it's harder, I think, to publish a book that you're not happy with. I think so. You've got to, kind of, yeah.
We couldn't finish it. I mean, literally every day we're like, what are we going to write? We couldn't get past those 200 pages. We brought it as far as it could go. So it was essential. It was necessary. So,
yeah.
Were you able to use some of that, though? I mean, it probably made starting over a little easier, because you've talked through character things and things like that. No? Well, you're like, not at all.
Here's the difference. Like, Sarah is like she was like, we're going to be able to use so much of this, and we're just going to set it in this way, and it's going to be fine. And I was like, my gut, I was like, we're going to probably save like 2 pages from this. And indeed, we really barely saved any of it. But we then did write a little original short story for Audible called The Getaway. And that was also quite different, but we did set it in more of a claustrophobic environment. So because we liked that idea, we just couldn't set a whole book in that place. So I do think it kind of helped, it did help. I don't know. It was what it was.
Painful to think of, losing the entire thing, but at least you're able to reuse it a little bit.
You always save it as well. I do that as well. I think, oh, well, actually, this is just going to be a little bit of light, superficial rewriting. And then it's it becomes kind of new suit, old shoes. Everything has to go. You have to even the stuff that you thought was pretty before suddenly starts to look really a bit ropey. So yeah, I know that the kind of, I can save so much of it, and no,
I really can't.
Well, Jane, your books are so setting oriented, and you just do such a great job of bringing, this time Tasmania to life, but whatever it is you're writing about. Tell me a little bit about that, how you approach it, so that I feel like I'm walking down the street in Tasmania after I'm reading your book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, well, I think, for me, so the settings, I always try and approach them so that they kind of are part of the plot, rather than just being a backdrop. I try and make it so that they actually kind of influence the characters' behavior and also who they are, depending on if they've grown up in that area or are new, or how much they know about, local history, that kind of thing. And also the beauty of Australia is it is very diverse, and it does have these kind of locations that have a bit of natural, maybe dangers. I don't know if danger is too strong a word, but it has these sort of challenges, I guess, that are kind of constant low level and occasionally high level, that the characters are sort of forced to live their lives around. So I think, the key for me is I always do an on-the-ground research trip. So I try and make sure that, for example, in The Survivors, there's a scene where they go diving in a shipwreck, which is one of the few places, in Australia where you can go and explore these wrecks. So I knew nothing about that. So I made sure I went out and had that sort of experience myself to, try and, write that, authentically. And I think for me, it's the key thing as well is about trying to cherry pick the things that are going to make the setting stand out without overloading the reader. So you don't want pages and pages of description. People can imagine, people know what it's like to feel hot or cold or stuck in the rain, but they maybe don't know what it's like to have to, keep your car fully supplied with a week's worth of food in case you get bogged in the sand in the outback. It's things like that, those elements that kind of make it really special to itself, I think.
That's so funny that you mentioned that, because I love The Lost Man, and I have recommended it to so many people. And I always talk about that, about how you described, how you had to have your car full, and that he wouldn't have been by himself with no car in the middle of nowhere. And just because that was all, something different. I mean, we don't really have that here.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting going out. I think that's why it's so important to go out to these locations for when I've got kind of a distinct setting. Because I mean, for The Lost Man, which was in true outback, middle of nowhere, Australia. I mean, I went out there with this idea for this sort of plot. I'd kind of plotted out, and I kind of thought, well, I might be sort of pushing the danger angle a little bit, but it's fictional, and people will go with it because they don't mind if you kind of hype up some of the elements. And I got out there and I completely underestimated how deadly this place is. People are dropping dead, so easily. It was shocking to me, exactly how kind of naive I'd been about exactly how harsh that environment is. So that was a really good example of why it was so important to kind of see it for myself.
Well, it is so remote, and I think that until you actually see that, you probably don't have any concept of it, because most of us don't live in that remote a location.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, same. I mean, I live in a city, and
right.
I don't, my car's got, coffee cup in it and my phone or something.
Right, exactly. Well, what about you, Greer? What kind of research do you guys do?
Well, our first 3 books have been set in New York City. So I've had to do a lot of location research. I think a lot of people are always trying to guess, is the preschool and The Wife Between Us, is that where your kids went to preschool? I'm like, no, it wasn't. But we have to do, we geek out on research of our own. So for like An Anonymous Girl, there's one of the main characters is a psychiatrist, and we did a lot of research on psychological studies because that was something that was in her mind, and that kind of thing was like a lot of fun. And for You Are Not Alone, each of She's chapters begin with little like data nuggets, and that was one of the most fun part of the book to do, was to research little like nuggets, like like for example, I can barely read this because my eyesight's so bad, but it's like more than half of Americans believe in love at first sight, with younger people being more likely to hold this belief. And so things like, these little like data nuggets that we wanted the reader to feel like they've got a sense of, did they think to themselves, gosh, do I believe in love at first sight? To get them sort of involved in the book. So it tends to be more, I would say, psychological research. I mean, because Jane, I feel like your books, I mean, the atmosphere is like a character in each of the books, right? They're just so it's such a huge part of each of your stories.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of become that way. I think because I lived in England for part of my life. Like I was born there, and I lived there for sort of secondary school and university, and then I moved back to Australia. And I think one of the things that really struck me was when I came back as an adult was sort of seeing how the kind of like the landscape does really impact people's mental health and their social relationships and all those kind of things in a way that I know it does happen like globally, world over, in many different ways, but I hadn't really appreciated quite how different it is. I'd come from one Western English-speaking country to another Western English-speaking country, and it was quite surprising to me how different it was. And I think a big part of that was just things like how the people in these agricultural communities, how the weather patterns are so like impacted everything about them, from like not just their businesses, but how they get along with other people in their community and their mental health states and things. On this thing is they just could not control, and that's always been interesting to me. I think through all the books, like how I guess how people psychologically react when they're to different pressures, and especially when it's something that they really can't do much about.
Well, also, I think so many of them are so, and additionally, you're talking about remote, you don't see many other people often. So, you're out there kind of on your own in your community. It's sort of like what we've all been experiencing a little bit more in the last, 9-10 months. But I think it's just such a different lifestyle. I remember like when we toured there, those kids go to school by radio and some of those type of things, that it's just a different lifestyle out in the outback. I mean, not so much Tasmania, but the outback.
Yeah, and I like and it's funny because actually I love reading books that are set in cities like New York, and the ones where they've got the kind of the bustle, and especially somewhere where like places where I've been, like I've really been to New York on holiday and stuff, but where it's basically you can totally like imagine yourself kind of walking those streets and things. But I think for me it's weird because I like reading about them, but I think I would struggle at this point to write something in a really populated area, because I also like books that are kind of where the whole story plays out within quite a set cast of characters, and it's sort of the mystery or whatever kind of emerges and resolves within this kind of bubble. And as a writer, I just find it like so much easier to control when they haven't got the option to kind of jump on the train and leave the state, or like go meet another friend for coffee. They've got to kind of confront this person that they don't want to talk to, or they've got to see that guy in the shop, and so that's sort of the, I guess, the technical reason rather than the creative reason why I do it as well.
Oh, I hadn't even really thought about that with your books. That's really interesting. Well, that kind of raises another question too. So The Dry is now out in Australia as a film. And so as a writer who really creates such a vivid setting, were you a little anxious about the movie being able to replicate that? And what have you thought about the movie?
Oh gosh, yeah. It's such a massive leap of faith, I think. It's amazing to have someone to want to adapt your book. Like it's really special to, Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I think I just cut off there. Did you?
No, we heard you.
Yeah. So this is leap of faith because it's your creative work and you've got to then trust someone else to do it. I think it helps a lot when you trust the people involved. And they were really great about sort of letting me know what was happening throughout the process. I got to go up there and be in it, so I got to be an extra in the funeral, which was really fun. And I loved it. It was honestly it's such a great adaptation. It's written by a guy called Robert Connolly, who's also the director. It's got the beautiful Eric Bana as Aaron Falk. I could not any more, from any man to portray that character. And it's done really well. It opened in Australia on New Year's Day, and it's had a really great reception. People are enjoying it, giving it great reviews, going to see it. So I'm thrilled really with it.
Well, I hope it'll make its way over here pretty quick.
Yeah, hopefully. I think, I know the producers are in talks with international distributors, and I think given the reception in Australia, they're feeling hopefully quite confident of getting a good platform, whatever that will be, like maybe, realistically probably could be streaming rather than cinemas. But I hope you guys get a chance to see it because I think if you like the book, the film is such a great kind of companion piece with it. They really work so well together, and they strike the same kind of tone. So.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think with the pandemic, almost everything is streaming here. I don't think there's much in the theaters at all. And then, at first I was kind of bummed about it, but now I think it's really nice because you're, getting to see stuff as it comes out.
I love it. You can pause, go bathroom, get some popcorn.
Do the T&P, right? Exactly. See, I'm on board with that. Greer, do you have a favorite of the books you guys have written?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's sort of like picking a favorite child. Maybe I would say The Wife Between Us only because it was my first book. It wasn't Sarah's first book. She'd done, so many by herself, but there was just the whole experience also was just so blessed from beginning to end, like anything that could go right with that book. I just felt like it was just such a wonderful, magical experience. And because I had I had expectations because I'd been an editor, so I certainly knew, the writing on the wall when certain things were happening, but all those things that were happening were just so fantastic. So maybe I would say that, but they're all special and, in different ways. And the one I'm working on now maybe is my favorite because I'm just so we're just so immersed in that. I don't know. Jane, do you have a favorite? Oh, I'm curious.
I'd say I'm desperate to know the title of the fourth book.
I'm
the same. It's sort of I know before I read a book, you'd hear authors say, it's like, picking one of your children. I'm like, oh, come on, you must have. I wouldn't really believe it, but I do believe it now because I think, it's such an involved process and it takes up, and each time when I think back, look at the book and I remember where I was at that point in my life and, what age my children were and, and they've all so they all have those kind of memories attached to them. And it's really impossible for me to separate the book from that experience of writing it. So it's, I completely agree. I think each book gives you something different. Every book is a different part of your career. And it's really impossible to compare. And I think as long as you're kind of happy at the end with all of them, that's all you can ask for really, that's what I think.
I do find, what's funny because I felt like our book, You're Not Alone it was so hard fought. And by the end, I just was like, oh my God, it was like the troubled child but then for so many people, it was their favorite of our books. So I was just like, God, I've lost all perspective on, on anything really. Like everyone seems to, it's probably the same with you. Like everyone has a favorite and they want to tell me why.
Yeah, God, people do really want to tell you why. It's,
right.
It's fine. We don't need critical analysis every time. It's okay. But yeah, it's funny, and I think that's always so interesting to me how divorced the experience of writing is from the reader experience. They don't care what you went through. They don't know, what it took you or how many what your childcare issues were or how it was in that Queensland desert. It's just they don't care. They just want to sit in their couch and read that book, and it's And it's, I always sort of, sometimes when I'm kind of in the midst of oh God, this is a hard bit or whatever, I do try and think that, I think, look, people will never know. They will never know how many times I had to rewrite this chapter, as long as I get it right in the end.
Yeah, it's true.
What about a favorite character? Or somebody that you feel like was easy or hard to write, if you don't really have a favorite character, maybe one that you thought, I'm never going to get this character right, or this character is a joy to write.
I mean, for me, it's hard to go past Falk, I think, particularly at the moment, with Aaron Falk, who is in the first 2 books, The Giant Force of Nature. I think in every book, there's always been, each main character is actually really special to me, and I wouldn't really rank him above the others. But I think particularly now, having kind of seen the film come out and seeing someone else's, I suppose, like interpretation of that character, especially like wrapped in Eric Banner's body, it kind of reminds me like a lot of like kind of why I was drawn to him in the first place. And it reminds me a lot of that kind of very first writing process when I was just kind of writing for the love of it. I hadn't got a book contract or anything. I was just, doing because I wanted to tell that story. So I think at the moment he is very sort of forefront of my mind for those reasons. But in everyone, I always, by the ends, I'm always like completely kind of so I feel so connected with the main character. I really like genuinely care about them.
I know, you really become really attached to the characters. I mean, I'm just thinking of it in, even in my doggies, in The Wife Between Us, there's a character, Aunt Charlotte, who's our protagonist's aunt, and she's like going blind. And Sarah made up these T-shirts for us that had all these like funny expressions of all the things that we say to each other. And one of them was, Aunt Charlotte always made us cry. And like, just even thinking about Aunt Charlotte, like we'll get even now, because she was just like the aunt that you all, that everybody would want. So,
Sometimes I have kind of like, kind of onward stories as well. Like some of the characters, I sort of think like, just in my mind, like I never write it. I never even do like kind of a short story or anything about it. But I kind of think, what would happen to them after this? And, like I sort of resolve their storyline in my head. Like, I kind of make sure they have like a little happy ending and, sort of, and it's just something sort of my own, not even amusement, I guess, like sense of closure, I suppose.
Yeah, of what happened. Yeah. There's a character also in Wife Between Us that I'm always like, we should be doing her story. There's this, like, what's her story? Because you don't get a lot out of it. That would be, be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you've probably lived with those characters for so long too, that it's hard to just immediately shut it off. They're still there with you. And so it makes sense that you'd be thinking about them from time to time.
Yeah.
Yeah. They do really get in your head as well. Because I think it's always really important as well as a writer not to, not to make your character become you, try and, so I think it's really important to think, this is how would this actual character react? This isn't how about I would respond to this or what I think they should do. How would they actually do it in this scenario? But at the same time, because you think about, well, they're acting this way because of X, Y, Z, all their backstory and all these reasons why they're making these good or bad decisions. You feel so like kind of parental towards them. And really protective of them, even like the bad ones. You sort of want people to understand them still as well.
Yes, absolutely. That's always with the villains. You have to understand why they're behaving, that way. And Sarah and I will walk down the street and we'll say, oh, those are boots that like Jess from Anonymous Girl would wear. Or, oh, that woman is so like Dr. Shields or, just whatever, like our little, you have them. So, like I know Dr. Shields eats 7 almonds and, her weight fluctuates between 117 and 118 or, like crazy things. So you're just like, they never made it on the page, but you just know these characters, right?
And do you and Sarah, do you think you're in your head, do you think your animation, those characters align quite closely? Or do you think Sarah's idea of a character is different from yours?
I feel like by the end, we talk about our characters so much that and we will talk about like, oh, what they look like or what they act like, but I think they're pretty aligned. I don't think it would come across on the page that well if we weren't, because Yeah, I do, but I'm never really in her head. So I'd have to know, like, there's certain characters. Does she really picture it exactly how I did? It's probably a little different, but pretty similar.
You never point to the boots and say, oh, that's so-and-so's boots. And she's like, oh my God, no.
Right. No, that's not happened.
Those are not her boots at all.
Exactly. She wouldn't even wear boots. She would only wear flip-flops. Yeah. So no, but that's an interesting question.
That's a very interesting question. Now you're going to go ask Sarah. Okay, tell me exactly how you see so-and-so.
Exactly.
Well, Jane, will Aaron Falk be coming back again?
Yeah, like I think he will actually. I think at least for one more. I think just to, he's got probably a bit of like his sort of personal narrative. I think could do with like a little bit more kind of closure. And I think as well, like I was saying, like just with the dry and stuff, on the film, it has kind of made me think a lot more about that character, and it's helped sort of prompt a few ideas that I think actually would be really good for him, because it's always been for me, it's always about having the best characters to tell the story. So for The Lost Man and The Survivors, I knew really early they had to be standalones, because I needed certain characters to tell the story that weren't him. It's been about trying to find that right vehicle for him and give him a chance to shine. And I think I've got a good idea that would like fit him really well. So so that's kind of what I'm kind of working through, in my head at the moment.
Well, there's probably been a resurgence of interest in him with the movie coming out in Australia. I mean, you're probably getting that question more than you. I mean, already people, I'm sure, ask you, but I bet with the movie, a lot of people are asking.
Yeah, that's right. And I always like, I think I always sort of try and think like, you've got to do what's right for the book. Like you can't sort of ever assume as well that, if I write this book with this character in it, eventually like, I can't let the movie dictate the books, if you know what I mean. Like, even if, there's loads of interest and stuff, like I couldn't sort of go down that road if I didn't feel that he was the right person for it. Because I think that's just like causing trouble for yourself, really. So it's taken me a while to really think about, what would be the right story for him. And then actually one sort of kind of emerged, and I just thought, actually I could really see this working. It ticks a lot of the boxes that I'm looking for when I'm kind of cementing down an idea. So yeah, so I'm kind of excited about that. And it's like, I don't know, Greer, if you feel this, but sometimes when you get an idea that kind of clicks, it's almost like an emotional reaction. Like it just, you can't really explain why that one works maybe better than another one, but you can just sort of feel like, yes, this is the right path to be on.
Yeah, we feel that way. I mean, I feel that way with stories, and also with like certain scenes or twists where you just get like shivers and you're like, oh my God, that's the right way to be going with this. And that is just such a great feeling to have. Or when you're like struggling, we were struggling in book 4 to kind of make connections between two plots, and it just kind of came together. I was like, oh God, that's just my day is done. Like I can,
You're like, we'll talk tomorrow.
Bye, Sarah.
Well, Greer, what about the Audible original? I think these are so fun, all these new Audible originals that are coming out. How is that?
It was really fun. I mean, first of all, 20,000 words seemed like a breeze compared to a book, and it was just a great. We did have this idea for this kind of claustrophobic, setting, and it came really easily to us. And then it was exciting because it was first read by a really wonderful narrator whose name I can't remember. Sorry, narrator. But then Kate Mara re-recorded it. I love her so much. So I listened to both, but it was just so exciting to hear. Well, Jane, you've now had this because you've seen a film, but it was the first time I'd heard our words really come to life. I mean, besides audiobooks, like just in such a kind of a different way with our actress. So that was great fun. And I think for Sarah and I, we kind of like, we're up for like any creative challenge. So that was a new challenge. We were actually commissioned to write the screenplay for The Wife Between Us, and we've never written a screenplay, but we just decided, why not, why not try to do it? Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Someone tells us it's terrible. So anything that kind of stretches me creatively is a fun endeavor.
Well, how's it going writing the screenplay?
It was
Is it done?
It's done. We did a draft. We did a draft based on direction. So it's Steven Spielberg's Amblin that acquired it, and they were trying to find a writer, and they couldn't find someone who really had a great vision. It's a tricky book to adapt, and so they approached us and kind of gave us a little direction. And so we wrote the screenplay, and then we got first we had to pitch them, and to get the job, which we were like Googling how to pitch a screenplay, then like how to write a screenplay, and then they came back to us and they were like, you kind of need to. They give us just like a lot of verbal notes, and they were absolutely right. Like, they've been so kind, I feel like, in explaining to us how to do this. So we wrote a second draft, which we heard they loved, and then honestly, no, we haven't heard anything. So things are a little quiet, but I really hope it gets made. I hope our screenplay gets made, but I feel like these kind of challenges it's just great to be, stretching and trying these, two things. And for me, I couldn't do it by myself. Like, I just, like, Sarah and I just take these leaps, and we're like, okay, what could go wrong? So.
Oh, there's John.
So we had a couple questions from the crowd. Greer, I wanted to ask you, we've been talking about the series books that Jane was doing. Have you and Sarah, has there been any temptation to take characters from a book and move them into another one and do a sequel to anything?
So there is a character from The Wife Between Us who we've thought about, maybe would there be something, maybe not a whole book, would she be good for a short story? But our book 4, the one of the main characters, we'll see, she could become a reoccurring character. We said to ourselves, we're just going to write the best book we can and keep it, make this book the best it can be, and not focus on if there's room for another story. But in the back of our heads, we're kind of like, she could be. We'll see. Got to finish this first.
And so Trisha had a really great question for you as well, Greer. She says, in your opinion, did coming from the publishing world make navigating the world as an author easier or harder?
I think easier. I felt like I knew probably questions to ask that maybe someone else wouldn't have known. I mean, I was also very lucky that I'm with St. Martin's Press with Jennifer Enderlin, who's just such a great editor. So I got placed in a very positive environment. So it made it easy, because I think I just feel like we've been, treated, so well, and they're just so behind us. Perhaps if it was a different experience, it might have made it harder, because I might have felt like I know what's going on behind the scenes, and it's not going that way. But I've just been lucky. I feel like I've been very lucky.
All right. So Jane, Paula wants to know, she's read all of your previous books. How does this new one, The Survivors, differ from your previous books?
Yeah, I mean, I guess other than the obvious, like the location is different, I quite like to kind of do, explore different settings, just to keep things a bit fresh. So this one's obviously coastal based. I think other than that, in terms of like tone and feel, I would say it's actually very similar to the others. Like I feel like I have kind of found my sort of style of writing, and the where the book is pitched at, and things that I feel kind of flows through all 4 of the books. But I think for me, the difference between this one, certainly in the writing process, was that by book 4, I have got, every time you write a book, I've learned like a little bit more about what works for me. And so for this one, I had the benefit of all the others in terms of certainly like the technical process. And I was able to get to the fun, creative side of it a lot faster. And I really liked the way the kind of mystery kind of locks together in this one. And I hope it's kind of the book where, you get to the end and you look back and you can kind of see all those signposts and things, and see how everything sort of slots in. So that was something I hoped at the start would happen. And I was happy at the end that I felt like that had come together in the way that I hoped it would.
Jane, I just have to say, I felt like it was such a satisfying ending to me because I felt like I was completely surprised, but everything made perfect sense. So it was like, I just thought it was pitch perfect. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you. That is music to my ears. That is exactly what I kind of aim for. Like I hope that's what the reader experience is. But I mean, as you would know, it's so weird when you're writing a book because you're having to because I know the ending. So you kind of have to judge, like, will the reader be surprised by this point? Or is there enough, or is there too much? Every clue feels like a big flashing red siren. And you're thinking, is it, or is it completely lost in everything else? So thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, and you had some good red herrings that I was like, so I don't want to say anything that'll spoil it, but I just thought like the way it resolved was fabulous. And my husband just finished it and he said the same thing. He was like, oh, this book is so good. So
thank you.
So going with sort of being surprises and things like that. So Diana asked, and this is for both of you, she wants to know, do you feel it's more important to have strong characters, mind-blowing plot twists, or epic settings? Let's start with Greer.
Oh boy. I mean, I just can't think of a book that way. Like it kind of has to have all three. I mean, probably settings are less, our settings, maybe because I live in New York, it feels less like novel and exciting. It's less about the setting, but in terms of like the twists and characters, that's what I feel like makes our books. It's about, these characters that you care about and the kaleidoscope twists and turns. That's what we're known for. So it's a hard question.
Yeah, I think it actually matters a bit differently at different points in a book, because I think, there's no point in having like a killer ending with a great twist if the book is like boring for the first 3 courses. Like if nobody gets to the ending, there's no point in having a great ending. And similarly, and so for that, I guess you need the characters to kind of pull the reader through, so they're invested to the end. But then at the same time, you can't have characters who kind of keep people turning the pages only to get to the end and you just be like, oh well, I guess we'll never know what happened. That's not fair either. So I think it really depends on. I think it maybe really depends on what stage of the book each of those elements kind of come into play.
All right. So before we head out tonight, too, I wanted to ask everybody, including you, Cindy. So we'll get you third. What is something that you have read recently that you have loved? Let's start with Jane.
So like the latest book, actually, I don't think it's out in the States yet, but I really enjoyed a book by an Australian author called Kate Mildenhall, who wrote this book called The Mother Fault. And it'll be, when it comes out, it'll be put on the literary shelf. It'll be kind of probably classed as like women's fiction because she's a female author and it's called The Mother Fault. But let me tell you, this is a great read. This is like a really gripping kind of slightly very near futuristic kind of just like, like recognizable, but like a little bit futuristic sort of version of Australia where like the climate is really in trouble and the government's having to step in to kind of control people a lot more because the situation is quite dire. And it's this woman whose husband goes missing, and she has to take her 2 young children and sort of go and try and find what happened to him. And I thought it was so gripping. It's so beautifully written, and the thing I loved about it most was the way she's got all these characters who have. I thought in people's relationships with people differ depending on what situation you're in. And I thought the nuance that she captured was so great. So it's The Mother Fault by Kate Mildenhall. I'm not sure when, the US publication date is, but it's definitely worth checking out when you can get hold of it.
Yeah, it looks like there's not a US date yet, but I put the name and the author in the comments for everybody, so you can definitely check that out. How about you, Greer?
Okay, so I just finished a book. This is not going to be for everybody at all, but I couldn't put it down. It's called The Push. And the author her last name starts with an A and her first name starts with an A. And
it's Audrey something. Audrey.
I'm looking it up. Let's see.
Look it up for me. And it's about a woman who has sort of there's a legacy of troubled mother-daughter relationships. And when she gets married, her firstborn child is a daughter. And she just kind of feels like there's something off in their dynamic, and you don't really know if it's in her head because she's lived, this sort of ingrained in her, or if truly this daughter is really trouble. And I was just like turning the pages, and it's mostly in the present, but there's a lot about the past, about, her mother and her grandmother and the kind of this legacy. But it's not for everyone. It's very, very dark.
Did you find?
Okay. Ashley Audrain is the author, and I've also posted a link to that in the chat. How about you, Cindy?
I just read Lisa Gardner's new one, Before She Disappeared. I think that's the name of it, Before She Disappeared. And it was great. I guess it's her first standalone in a long time, and it takes place in Boston. And this woman, she bases it on a true individual, these people who go around and try to solve crimes, and they're not detectives or anything. They just learn about these missing children and then show up someplace. So she sets it in Mattapan in Boston. And this woman, recovering alcoholic, shows up to try to track down this 15-year-old girl that has completely just disappeared, and they can't figure out why. And it is such a page turner. I just thought it was phenomenal. And again, loved the ending. And Lisa writes really well. So it was a fun read.
And Cindy, before we go, can you tell everybody what's coming up next for Conversations with a Page, or you've got coming up next on the podcast?
Yes, definitely. So February 17th, we're hosting Nancy Johnson and Julie Carrick-Dalton for their 2 new debuts. The Kindest Lie is Nancy's book, takes place during the Obama administration. And then Julie's book takes place just kind of present day, maybe a little bit in the future in New Hampshire, deals with climate change and racism and secrets that are left behind. So I loved both books, and I'm really excited to host them both. And then Jane's episode on the podcast dropped yesterday. And then Susan Meissner's drops on Friday with her new book, The Beauty of Fragile Things, I think is the name of it. So yeah, so lots of fun stuff.
So for everybody who has been watching, if you tuned in late, we've been talking with Jane Harper, whose new book, The Survivors, just came out on Tuesday. And we've also been chatting with Greer Hendricks, who also writes with Sarah Pekkanen, and their newest book, You Are Not Alone, has just come out in paperback. We do have signed book plates to go with our copies of Survivors, and we've got You Are Not Alone in stock now. As I mentioned when we got started, the store is open for browsing, so if you want to come in and visit us, please do. We know not everybody is comfortable getting out and about in the world at the moment, so we're still doing curbside pickup. And of course, we're available through murderbooks.com and also on the phone to order anything. If you missed any part of the chat, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive it, so you'll be able to go back and rewatch. And while you were there, you can also check out all of the other author events that we've got going on. Jane and Greer, thank you so much for doing this with us this evening. I'm sad we couldn't do it in the store, but thank you so much for being able to join us virtually.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This was so fun.
And Cindy, thank you so much for leading the chat. It's always nice to have a night off when I kind of actually just get to sit back and kind of watch the chat and not have to worry about like tech issues and all of that stuff. So everybody take care, and we will see you soon.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.